Out of the data you saw last year, what kind of trends did you see?
So we collect compensation information mostly in North America, 75 to 80%. But there's a continuing tightening of the labor markets, which translates to an increase in wages. It's surprisingly heterogeneous, and that cuts across locales, sectors, and job functions. Seattle is a very robust market, and if you don't step outside of Seattle, you would think that everything is great. Go to the oil fields, go to North Dakota. So there's shifts in there, and certainly we see that continuing.
Okay.
So.
And the other two companies, the data that you're seeing, what do you see happening this year? What do you think the trends are going to look like?
I think this year is people are recognizing that companies who take their employees very seriously in terms of, we call it well-being, are outperforming the market. I think that's been the lost thing, because well-being and wellness programs and things like that have felt a little fluffy, and like that's what the HR department, while the real business people do real work, that's what HR is kind of doing, and then let's throw some money at that. The connection of intentional culture to real business outcomes is becoming much stronger. You talked about millennial employees. I view them as no different than most employees, but an incredible source of innovation if you can tie into their passion. And so the linear connection between well-being to employee engagement to business outcomes is, that story is becoming much more clear, especially with new ways of big data and BI and measuring all this stuff.
Yeah. David, anything to add?
Yeah, so I think there's an old adage that you don't quit your job, you quit your boss, right? The new adage is you don't quit your boss, you quit your peers and your team, right? And so as we become more interconnected and you work in cross-matrix functions, it's really important about the caliber of the peers and the relations. Because if you ask people usually what do you love about your job, you have vision, values, but it's usually who I work with and the energy I get from them. So we see that becoming more and more prevalent, and so that puts pressure on hiring the right people and bringing the right people into the culture. The other one is, Teri mentioned a little bit earlier, is that when we did our research into, so we asked a lot of questions and then we correlate those against how happy employees are. And the number one factor that was correlated was like 0.91, so it's extremely, extremely strong correlation. I actually had the data scientists run it again, was how transparent do they think that management was, right? And I was like, wow, that's basically free, right? In terms of like just divulging more information. So I always challenge myself and our clients is like, well, how can you be more transparent? And the perception of transparency is the reality. So if your employees don't think you're that transparent, that's what's going to get around. So always challenge. I think the only thing we don't divulge is comp data, and there are some companies that do that, like Buffer. But there's also some pros and cons about doing that. But that's basically where we draw the line. Like we share our board slides. There are some things that we redact if it's personal, but we try to be as transparent as possible. And that's what I try to share with other people. Is like push yourself. And when you give that transparency, you're going to see the payoff down the line.
Can I pile on here, or is that acceptable, Teri? I totally agree, and underlying the academic research would use the word trust. So transparency and trust are very closely related things. You trust people when you feel their cards are on the table or they're open. And the opposite, I think, is the word that every CEO is terrified of, which is hypocrisy. Well, they say one thing and then they do another. Or it sounds really good at the top and they have this great aspirational mission, which our company does, so I'm especially paranoid about this. But the way that they actually do their work day to day doesn't match up to that. And I think a lot of companies do really well at the high level, the branding, the values, the mission, the core. The C-suite all feels good because they're frankly all really well paid and they get to go on offsites in nice places and strategize. So that it's authentic. And then at the low level, the well-being is, usually people join a company because they like that mission and they're well paid. But I agree with David, it's that middle layer where engagement happens. It's middle management, it's your team, it's your peers, and that's the hardest level to make really consistent. So
Yeah, and just to add, our research lines exactly at what David was talking about, which is the difference between a person's intention to leave versus transparency around a whole range of things. We obviously focus on transparency around companies' pay strategies, but broadly speaking, it's like a 30 to 40 point difference between a level between people intending to stay or people that are satisfied in a transparent versus a non-transparent environment, or what they perceive as transparent, non-transparent.